All right, hello and welcome everyone to MSDynamicsWorld.com's Spring 2015 BI and Reporting webcast series. I'm Jason Gumpert, and I'm joined today by a new speaker for us, Jennifer Rands. Many of you probably know Jennifer. She's a Senior Program Manager on the Microsoft Dynamics GP team, and we're really excited to have her joining us today to talk about SmartList Designer. Before we get started, I'd also like to just briefly recognize our reporting series sponsors and thank them for their support of the site. They are DeFacto, Jet Reports, and Solver. So moving forward, we invite you to add your feedback and ask Jennifer questions today during the presentation. You can use the Q&A block that you should see to the right of the slides. And without further delay, I am happy to welcome Jennifer Rands. Jennifer.
All right, thank you so much, Jason. As Jason said, I am a Senior Program Manager here at Microsoft, and I'm just going to go ahead and click over to my slide deck here. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the GP SmartList Designer, and this will be an overview session. To give you a little bit of a background on myself, I am a Program Manager within the GP R&D team, or the Research and Development team here at Microsoft. I've been working at Microsoft for 17 years, started off as part of the Great Plains company and was part of the acquisition when Microsoft purchased Great Plains back in 2001. So I've been working on the GP product for those entire 17 years. I focus mainly on distribution series and then also business intelligence. And so that's why today I will be talking to you a little bit about this SmartList Designer feature. So let's go ahead and just move to our next slide here. So today's agenda, we'll spend about 50 to 55 minutes talking about SmartList Designer, and then at that point I will answer any questions that you guys have in the Q&A. If I see a question as I'm going through, if it pertains to exactly what I'm talking about, I might answer it at that point, but I will for sure get to all the questions at the end of the session. So today's agenda is, what is SmartList Designer? Then we'll also talk a little bit about a designer tool overview. So we'll look at the tool, walk through each of the different sections within that tool, and talk about how those parts will make us or allow us to create different types of smart lists within the GP product. During the session, I'll do a demo on how to create different lists using the SmartList Designer tool. We'll talk about how we create a brand new list. We'll also talk about how you can modify an existing list. And then we'll talk about creating lists using a view as well. So we can create lists either using SQL tables or SQL views within the Dynamics GP product, or we can even use views that are outside of the GP product but are stored within your SQL database that you're using for a GP. The third part of our agenda today will be talking about the publishing of reports to Excel. Within GP 2015, we added some new functionality that allows us to publish reports automatically to Excel, and then that report will be refreshable. So I might have somebody outside of the GP product organization, but they still want to see information within GP. Well, I can publish that report, and that report is no longer static, but it's refreshable. So every time I open the report or I choose to refresh the connection, it'll bring in the new data. And so we'll walk through an example of that as well. And we'll talk about within that section the setup of what we need to have in order for that to work. We'll also talk about security, and then we'll see that refreshable data itself. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what is SmartList Designer. Well, what SmartList Designer is this new functionality that we added back in GP 2013 R2 that allows us to create smart lists. So we automatically have some default smart lists when we install GP, but what we heard from customers and partners during our feedback is, well, not all of those lists have everything that we need, so we want to be able to create our own lists. So now with this functionality, those users can create those new lists. We've also got feedback on the report or the list that we have about 95% of the information, but they wish that they could add or modify those lists to get that additional information that it might not have in there for them. So this feature, again, allows the end users to modify those smart lists and then save that smart list, and then they can go back and render that smart list at any given point in time. And then again, our product also allows us to create and publish refreshable Excel reports, either to a network share or to a Sharepoint site, where people outside of the GP product can see that data and that information. And when we publish those reports that we publish that are refreshable are reports that we're building off of SQL views within the SmartList Designer tool. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to talk about the tool itself, and we're going to do a little bit of an overview of the tool. So I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen here. And now you should see that I've got my GP application launched. And from my home page, which this is the page that I normally come into when I'm right within inside of the GP product, if I go to my administration tab, we'll have different pieces within the administration. Within GP 2015, which is what I've got installed here, is I will see under the report section I have SmartList and SmartList Designer. So I can get to the SmartList Designer option by choosing SmartList Designer, or I can go to SmartList itself and then choose this new button. Either way will open up the SmartList Designer window. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of SmartList and then just open my SmartList Designer window. So this is the window that we've added within the GP functionality that allows us to create different smart lists within our GP product. So you'll see within the window that this has somewhat of an office feel. We've got the ribbon up at the top, which gives us our different actions that we can perform when we're creating a smart list. You'll also notice we have a list name field, a product field, and a series field. And these three fields come into play when we get back into SmartList itself. So as I'm creating a list, I need to create a specific and a unique name for this particular list. And what I always recommend is creating a name for your list that is giving you the information back. So shortly we'll do an example of creating a list, but let's say for this particular demo walkthrough, I wanted to create a list of all of my customers. The best thing I could do is my list name would be customers or customers that are active, something along those lines. So the user that goes to select that list knows the type of information they're going to get back before they even generate the smart list itself. The product, this will give you a list of all the products that you have installed with your GP instance that you're using. It'll show you your core Microsoft Dynamics GP product and then any other add-on or third-party applications that you have. And where these come into play is when, again, I go back into SmartList. This will determine where my list that I'm creating is going to show up within SmartList. So I'm going to leave mine set to Microsoft Dynamics GP, and then I've got my different series. And these, again, are broken down based off of the series that you have within the product you selected. So Microsoft Dynamics GP has these different series, and these, again, have to do with what I have installed in my system. If I had manufacturing installed, I'd see the series of manufacturing in here as well. And this series is going to, again, determine where my smart list shows up. So I'm going to leave this just set to financial for right now. Within the SmartList Designer window, we've got our database view over here to the left. And what this window is this is a list or a tree view of all of the tables and all of the views that we have or that the person has access to within Dynamics GP, broken down by the different, again, products that we have installed, and then the different series, and then the particular table names. So if I wanted to create a report against some of my financials data, I could come in here and see my account master table and choose the expansion, and then I get a list, which is in user-friendly terms, for all of the fields that are within that table. And these lists of these fields show up in the order that the information is stored within the table. So I can navigate through this tree view and see the different tables within the products. And then I'll also see a list of all of my different views within my system database and within my company database. So my system database is that database of the Dynamics system that is linked up to my particular company. So because we have multi-tenancy within GP now, each company could have its own system database. And why we want to give access to that database is we store particular views within that database that could be linked up to this company. So for example, we have some HR views that are in here. We also have organizational views. So we do have views within the system database that could pertain to the company that you're logged into. So we give you the option to be able to see those views and select from those views as well. And then within the company drop down here within the tree view, I will see a list of all of my views. So right now it's going out to my SQL server and grabbing back a list of all the views that I have access to within my database. And once this list goes ahead and populates, you'll notice that we've got some of the lists that show, or some of the views show with a non-friendly name, and then we also have some that show with a friendly name. Each one of these will be determined based off of the product that the view is coming from, or how the end user that created the view decided to name that view. So a lot of these views that we have are ones that come right out of the Microsoft Dynamics GP product that we've created, so users can create reports within SmartList Designer without having to know a lot about the table structure. Like this one is called accounts. If I go in there, this will show me all of my account information within my general ledger. I also have one called account transactions. So this pulls me all of my transactions from general ledger. And the nice thing about using this view is if I'm an end user that doesn't know where a particular transaction is stored once it gets posted into the general ledger, whether it's in a work status, an open status, or a history status, this view pulls all of those tables together and gives me that list. So from a user standpoint, I don't need to necessarily know that it's in the GL 20,000 or the GL 30,000 table. I just know that it'll be stored in this account transaction view. So as I'm going through and creating my list, and I'm just going to call this one customer just so I can get through some of these fields. When I pick a particular table and I choose the expansion box next to the series, I'll get a list of my different tables. So I'm just going to, again, for my example, choose the expansion box next to my RM customer master. I can grab a couple of different fields, and as I'm clicking on those fields, those selected fields show up in my selected fields list. So right now I'm building the data that's going to come back in my SmartList once I get to my SmartList view area. If I wanted to click all of the fields, I could choose the checkbox next to the actual table, and it'll automatically click all of those fields for me, so I don't have to go one by one. And as I'm adding those, that's how they show up within my selected fields list. So if I wanted something up here above, I'd want to mark that one first and then come back and choose the other fields. So as I'm clicking, they show up in my selected fields list. If I choose multiple tables, I'm just going to grab one more table here just to give you guys an example. I have this section called relationships, and once I have more than one table defined in my field list, I have to create a relationship between those tables. So within this next section, I have to choose how my customer master and my RM open file are related to each other. Now I can go through and manually do this by clicking the table and then finding the field names and then choosing my join and then finding the next table and the field name. So if I had two tables, I need to have one relationship. If I had three tables, I need to have two relationships. So all of those tables need to be defined towards each other in order to have my list defined. Once I choose OK on my SmartList, if I don't have my relationships set up correctly or set up, what would happen is I would get a message letting me know that I have to define my relationships before I can save my list. We also have this option in here called auto link. And this is something that's very unique to the SmartList Designer tool, which what we do with this auto link is we look at the different tables that we have, and we try to automatically link those tables together. And how the auto link functionality works is it looks at each table, and then it looks at the primary keys within those two tables, and it looks to see if there's fields that have the same name and the same definition. And if it finds there's a field with the same name and the same definition between those two tables within that primary key, it will link those tables together. So in my case, I chose my customer master and my RM open file, and it knew that the customer number field was in common between those two, so it created a join for me. Now you'll notice in this drop-down, I have different options that I can choose for my joins. I have a left join, an inner join, and a cross join. And I always get a lot of questions on how do I know which type of join to use? And I always like to use an example. And so what I'll do is I'm going to continue using this example here in order to give you a good definition of what each of these different joins is. So if I am doing an inner join and I've got my customer master table and my RM open file, what it will do is it's going to only pull me back results with an inner join where there's a record in the one table and a record in the other table. So in this case, if I have a customer called Aaron Fitz and he has transactions in the open file, I will get that data back if I do an inner join. Now, if I choose to do a left join, it will look at my left table, which is my customer master, and it's going to compare it to my open file. And it says, give me back a list of all of my customers, even if there's no transactions in this open file. So if Aaron Fitz doesn't have transactions in this case, he's still going to come back within my report. So I'd get a list and I'd see Aaron Fitz, but I wouldn't see any transactions because there's no transactions. If I did the inner join, Aaron Fitz wouldn't even show up on my report because there's nothing in the open file. And then for the cross join, these two tables are probably not a very good example because you're never going to have a transaction in the RM open file that doesn't have a customer on it. But where you'd probably want to use a cross join is if I'm trying to grab data from an open table and I'm going to try and grab data from a history table. There's never going to be a time where I have a transaction sitting in open and a transaction sitting in history. It's going to be one or the other. But if I wanted to create a report that pulls all of the transactions from open and all of the transactions from history, I could choose the cross join, and then it's going to grab all the data no matter which table it's in. So those are the three options for choosing the joins within the relationship window. So between those three types of joins, you should be able to create a relationship for the tables in the list that you're trying to create within the SmartList Designer tool. So once I've gone through and created my relationship, the next thing I can do, if I wanted to, is I could filter out what types of transactions I want to see within my list. So when I do this filter, that means that every time I render the SmartList, that data is automatically going to be filtered. So maybe, for example, on my customer list that I'm creating, I want to see customers that are just from North Dakota and Minnesota. I could come here and create a list that would look at that field, which I don't have that field selected, but if I had North Dakota, or if I had the state selected, I could put that field name and then create my condition. So let me just show you some of the conditions you have the ability to use. So I could say state is, and then I could put the value of ND. And so this list would always give me back just the customers that came from North Dakota. Now, if I wanted to make that filter ad hoc, or as I'm rendering the SmartList every time, I don't want to put a filter in here. I'd want to do that on the particular SmartList itself. So filters are only going to be used if you always want to restrict the data that you're looking for. You'll also notice up here within the selected field section, we have a little function tab or a function button. Within there, this function allows you to create calculated fields. So maybe I've got some information within my tables but it doesn't give me all of the information that I'm looking for, but I know that I can create a calculated field. I could go through and create a new calculated field, and the calculated fields window gives me all of these different expressions that I could choose from. So I could name my calculation. So I'm just going to type in real quick. And then I get a drop down of the different types that we have. So we've got currency, date, integer, long integer, and string. So all of the data that we store within our tables would be one of these different types of fields. So depending on the type of result I'm looking at getting back, in my case, I want to get some string data back. So that's the type that I'm going to choose. So from here, I can go through and I see a list of all of my tables that I've got within my SmartList. And then I'll see a list of all of the fields within those particular tables. So as I'm going through, I can take those fields and add them into my expression just by double-clicking on the field. And then you'll notice that that information adds into my expression calculation at the bottom. If I have a problem, I could go ahead and delete that and work my way back and choose the exact fields that I'd like. So I just walk through. I can also use these different functions. So maybe I'm wanting to take, let's say for example, I'm creating a report from inventory and I want to take the price of my item minus the cost, just to see kind of what my profit would be on those particular items. Even though I don't store that profit number within the table, I could create a function that would take the price and then minus the cost, and then that calculated field would show up in my list. We also, besides having functions, we have constants. So if I wanted to maybe take an amount and multiply it by 100, I could do that. Or if I wanted to add a text string. So another good example for this text string would be if I'm doing an employee and I want to take their first name and add their last name together. What I could do is I could create a calculated field that said name with a semicolon, and then I could have their first name and last name. Well, the word name, it would actually be text, so I could type that in for my value and insert that into my expression and then add those two fields together. So I'm creating this expression that when I render the report, it always would have the text of name with the colon, and then it would have the two fields names based off of the employee that is coming back. So I have multiple different options that I could go through and create calculated expressions for. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of here because I'm not going to really even save this SmartList. I'm just using this as we're walking through the tool. But the other thing you'll notice here is I have the ability to hit this execute query. And where this comes into play is when I'm creating my SmartList, instead of saving the SmartList, going out and then running the SmartList to see if I have the information I'm looking for, and then having to come back and modify it, I can come in here, execute that query, see what it looks like, make sure I'm getting the correct information before I go ahead and click Save or click OK, and then have that SmartList saved. So that's really nice. You'll also notice up here that I've got the ability to delete. So this would actually delete the SmartList. So maybe down the road, this is a SmartList that we no longer need. I could come in and delete that list, and that cleans that out of my SmartList list. We also have this create go-to functionality. I can create different go-tos off of my SmartList. So maybe I want to jump around, and once I've created this SmartList, if a user is using that, maybe they want to jump to a different SmartList, I could put that in here, and then it gives me a list of all the different SmartLists that I can create. And I'll show you an example of that when we go through and create some of our examples. I can also go to a different navigation list, or I can go to a web page. So maybe I've got a list of all of my customers and I want to jump to the UPS web page. I could put a web page go to where I type in the name of the actual web page and then the address. And then as I click on the go to, it would automatically launch that web page for me. So we've got lots of different options on what we can do with our go-tos. So that's a little bit of an overview. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this SmartList here. But that's an overview of the SmartList Designer window. So I'm going to stop sharing here and just go back to my PowerPoint. So that was the demo. So now we're going to go through and actually talk about how to create a couple of these different lists. So the first one that we're going to do is we're going to create a list using tables within the Microsoft Dynamics GP product. The second option that we're going to do after that is we're going to actually edit a list that has missing information that we want. And so we're going to add an additional table to our list and then add the field that we're looking for within that particular list. And then our third option is we're going to create a list using a SQL view. So we'll talk about the differences between each one of those. All right, I do have one question. Somebody was asking, can a custom SQL view be included in the selection of the SmartList Designer? And the answer to that is yes, those can show up within the SmartList Designer. Let me go back here and I'm going to share my screen again. What determines whether those lists or which views show up within your SmartList Designer list will depend on two different things. The first thing being if that SQL view is stored within your company database inside of GP. So like my company database is called TWO with the number 1. So as long as I created that view within that database, it would show up within my views list. And 2, the other way it would show is as long as the user that I'm logged into GP with has security to that view, then it would show up in there as well. So if I've given access to particular people with that view, those people would be able to render that smart list. If they don't have security, what would happen is when they went to render the smart list, they'd end up getting an empty smart list because they don't have access to that SQL view to bring the information back. All right, so let's look at our very first list that we're going to create, which is our sales suggested items. So if I look within GP, under our inventory items, we added some new functionality, and let me just put a particular item in here. We added some functionality a couple versions ago that allows me to track suggested items. So as I'm selling this particular item, I might want to sell another item with that item. So now I've got a list of all these items that I suggest to sell with a particular item. Well, if I go out and look at SmartList, and I look under sales, there's really nothing in here that talks about suggested items. If I look under inventory, there's nothing in there that looks for suggested items either. So now I want to create this new list so I can see all of the items and the items that are suggested with those particular items. So if I click on the new button, I'm going to get my SmartList Designer window, and you'll notice because I had the sales series highlighted, it automatically defaulted in with that sales series. And I'm going to go ahead and leave that, and I'm just going to call this one suggested items. So that gives me the indication of now I know what this list is going to pull for data. And I'm going to go ahead and just drill through, and my suggested items tables are under my inventory series because those fields are being stored on the item. And if I scroll over here, you'll see that here I've got this suggested sales item header table and a suggested sales item setup line table. So I'm just going to go ahead and look at both of those. And this first table gives me a list of all of the items, all of the made items that I have. And then we have different fields in here that allow me to determine if I'm going to allow those suggested items to be entered on quotes, orders, fulfillments, and invoices. And I'm not going to worry about those particular fields, but I do want to grab my item number, which is the main item. And then in my item setup line table, I've got my suggested item number and then the description and then the quantity. So I'm going to go ahead and pick that, the item number, the item description, the quantity, and just for fun, I'm going to grab the sales script field as well. Now, because I chose two tables, I have to create that relationship between the two. So I'm going to go ahead and pick my first table and choose item number. And I'm going to do my inner join. And I'm going to pick my second table. And you'll notice that now that I picked that first table, now I only see one table within this dropdown because it knows that I already chose that first table. And then I'm going to choose item number. And just to test, I'm going to go ahead and execute my query and make sure I'm getting back what I want. So here I can see my white phone cord and then my different items that are suggested and then the quantities. And you'll also notice that I've got some information in my sales script. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And back within my SmartList window, you'll see now I've got this brand new list called Suggested Items, and it gives me a list of all of my items that had suggested items set up, and it gives me the 5 different columns that I had told it to add within my SmartList Designer window. Now at this point, I can go ahead and do the exact same functionality within SmartList that I did with any list that automatically come with the application. So I can do searches, I can choose columns, I can move them around. I can print this list, I can export it to Excel or Word. I've got different options within SmartList that I can apply all that information to this list. And anybody who has security to this SmartList now will be able to render the SmartList. All right, so let's go ahead and now we're going to create another list. But before we do that, I want to show you the list that I have. So I've got this item list, and what I really want to see is my list price for these particular items. So normally what I would do is come into this columns button and go to my ad, and I would scroll through my list of all the different fields that I can add. And unfortunately, by default, the list price field is not one of the fields that I can automatically add to my list. So what I'm going to do here is cancel out. And because I have my items list highlighted, when I click on the new button this time, it is going to make a copy of that particular list, and it's going to put the fields in there that are already part of that smart list. It's going to set up the series and the product, and now I just need to add my name. So I'm going to put in here items with price because I'm going to be adding the price on here. And so now at this point, I can go ahead and add tables, add views, do whatever I would like to get that information. So I know that my price is within one of my inventory tables. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll through. And like I said, if I didn't know which table it was in, I could always go under views, and we have an item view that would have the information in there as well. But I know that this field is in my item quantity master. I'm sorry, not item quantity master, item currency master. And here is my list price field. So I am adding this new table to my existing list, which is actually just creating a copy of that list for me. So I can't modify the default list because we wouldn't want you to change the default, but it creates a copy and then lets me modify that copy. And then you'll notice as I added this field, I've got these double tick marks next to it. That's my visual indicator that this field is a currency field. So if I double click on the field here, it's going to bring up a format field window. And so this is going to allow me to format my currency. Now I can leave it as default, which means it's going to look at my company settings to see what my currency is set up for, which in my case it's set up with a $sign and 2 decimal places. So I could leave it set up as the default, or no matter what, if I wanted it to have a $sign on it and then maybe 3 decimal places, I could change that, and then this field now would show with a $sign and 3 decimal places. But I'm going to go ahead and just leave that to default and select OK. And now I'm just going to go ahead and click OK here, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so because I forgot to create my table relationship, it's sending me that message letting me know that those relationships need to be defined before I can save it. So now I need to come down here and find my item table, which is that table that's being used for the default list, and find the field and create my relationship with my item number. And now I'm going to go ahead and execute my query. I can see my data coming back here. And I'm going to go ahead and choose OK. And now you'll see a list of all of my items and then all of the list prices. And you'll notice because I left mine to be at the default and I have multi-currency enabled for my company here, I can see that this particular item has a $0 list price for the US. Then it's got a $0 list price for the Canadian dollar. And then we've got different types of functionality. So I got the euro and then I've got the Australian dollar. So every different type of item that's set up with a different type of list price based on currency is going to show up in this list. So I can scroll through here and get that particular information. So that's how easy it is to edit a list that automatically or that doesn't automatically have the information within that columns tab that you were looking for. So now I've got my brand new list and I can again do the exact same functionality that I was doing before. All right, so now let's go ahead and take a look at the one last different type of list that we can create using a SQL view. So because we've looked already at inventory information, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to go look at my time cards in payroll. And so this is some new functionality that we added with GP 2015, the payroll time card functionality. So what I want to do is I want to see a list of all of the time cards that are out there for employees that are still pending approval. So I know that I've got a view within my database that stores all of that information for me. So I'm going to go through this view section and find that particular SQL view and then create my list off of that view. So as it's going out and grabbing all of my views, this one takes a little bit longer just because there's a lot of views within the database and it needs to look to see what I have security to before it can build that list out. But here's my employee time card pending. So the nice thing about this view is that it was named nice, so I know exactly what type of data is coming back, and then I know that that's the data that I want. So I'm going to pick my employee and their pay schedule, the year, the start and the end date for that particular period. I want to pick the person's first and last name. And then let's see, we'll look at how many hours they have in there, and then also the workflow status. So this will allow me to see what employees still have time cards out there, how much time is on those time cards, and then the status of those particular time cards. So because I only am grabbing from a view, I don't need to set up a relationship here, so I'm just going to go ahead and choose OK and come out to SmartList and go under payroll, and here's my time cards. And now I can see that this particular employee has a time card out there that has 8 hours, and then another one for 15 hours, and then another one for 9 hours. So I need to figure out why these particular time cards have not been approved yet. So now at this point, I can see that information, and I can go through and get that information out of GP and then do some analysis on that. Now I want to go back to my item list that I created. Within GP, we've got different options with our go-tos. So here's my default list for my items, and you'll notice I have these go-to drop-downs where if I've got an item highlighted, I can go to a particular different window. So I just click the drop-down and I go to item inquiry, and it brings that item inquiry open with the particular item that I have highlighted. When I create a new list, I can create those new go-tos, but the other nice thing I can do is when I'm making a list off of an existing list like I did with this item price. When I click the field and I click the drop down, you'll notice that those go-tos automatically came over too. So if I'm creating a new list and I want to have go-tos on there, if I can create that list off an existing list, then I will get those that go-to functionality automatically without having to set anything up, which is a really nice feature to have. So now I can go through and drill into GP windows based off of the list that I created. All right, so let's go back here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a minute and go back to my slide deck. So we talked a little bit about how to create a list using a table. We talked about editing a list and then adding that additional table. You can do the same thing where if you want to edit a list, you can add a SQL view instead. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a table. It can also be a view. And then we talked about how to create a list using a SQL view. So multiple different ways on how to do this. And you can also do a combination. So maybe I wanted to create a list using a table and a view. I can do that as well. So that was the demo that we just went through. Now let's talk about publishing reports. So as I stated in the agenda, we were going to talk about publishing reports. There's a few things that we need to do in order to be able to publish reports to Excel. So there's some setup, there's some security to do, and then you'll get those refreshable reports. So I'm going to, again, go ahead and share my GP here. And the first thing we need to walk through is the setup on how we can publish reports to Excel. So as a default setup within inside of Microsoft Dynamics GP, under your Tools Setup System and then Reporting Tools Setup, we have this Excel Reports tab within the Reporting Tools Setup that allows me to set up my Excel reports to deploy. And they can be deployed to two different locations, either a network share or a Sharepoint site. And just for ease, I have mine set up as a network share, and I've got mine going to my particular Dynamics folder and then an Excel folder. So if I come out here and look at my Excel folder, you'll notice that I have two different folders underneath. I have my data connections, which is my connection between my Excel report and then my data. And then I have each one of the particular reports. And the reports are broken down by company. So I'll have a folder for each of the different companies I have within GP that I've deployed. And then underneath there, we follow that same series structure. So company, field service, financial, inventory, payroll, sales, etc. So any of the reports that I have deployed with Excel will show up in here. So you'll notice that I've got all of my list of my Excel reports. So in order to deploy reports inside of the SmartList field functionality, I need to have that setup done first. So I've got that particular piece set up. The second thing I need to do is when I'm in the SmartList Designer and I'm creating a SmartList, this particular SmartList would have to be set up as a SmartList off of a view. So let's go ahead and I'm going to create one here real quick so we can see how this works, called inactive accounts. And this is going to show me all the inactive accounts that I have within my financial series in the GL. So again, I'm going to go under my views and then my company, and I'm going to find my accounts view, which is going to give me a list of all the accounts, just as if I was going under cards, financial, and accounts. And then I'll pick the fields that I want within that view. So I've got account number, I want the account description. I definitely want active because I want to be looking at inactive accounts. And then I'm just going to add a couple more fields, my user-defined 1 and my user-defined 2. So now if I execute this, I'll see my list of information here down at the bottom. So I can see my account number, the description, active, and then the 2 user-defined fields. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now from here, I just have a normal SmartList under my financial series and then inactive accounts. I can use this as a normal user, come in here, check out these reports. I can export it to Excel. Anybody who has access to this report within inside of SmartList and GP can look at this information. As data changes, the report will change. But with this new functionality of being able to publish reports to Excel, this will give somebody outside of GP the ability to see this data and see it as it happens and as it changes. So you'll notice up in my actions in my ribbon, I have this new button called Publish. This will be enabled, one, when I've got that set up correctly, where I've deployed my Excel reports. Two, the user that I'm logged into has access to that particular folder structure or to the Sharepoint location in order to publish. And this report is being created using a SQL view. So once those are available, then this Publish button is available. And if I click Publish, I'll get a message back letting me know that that Excel report has been published successfully. So now if I come out here and go to my reports and then my folder, because it was a financial report, if I double click on it, and I'm just going to click my date modified so it puts the newer ones up at the top, you'll notice it's 1146 here. So this report just got deployed. So I can go ahead and open that report up in Excel. And I'm going to go ahead and enable my content. And now here is my report. So it's got the latest and the greatest information. And how do I know it's the latest and greatest? Let's just go look out here real quick. If I come in under cards, financial, and account, and I'm just going to pull up my cash account. I'm going to mark this as inactive. And then I'm going to make this change and I'm going to click Save. Now, because I had this report open previously, in order for me to see the changes, I have to click this Refresh All. But you'll notice that now my data is automatically updated. If I had this report closed and I opened it, when it opened, it would automatically go out and reconnect and grab the newest data. But because I had the report open, I have to force that refresh. But so if I'm working on a report and I've got this Excel spreadsheet open, it's as easy as clicking this Refresh All and my data will update. So if I'm creating a report where I'm grabbing a bunch of transactions and I know people are posting transactions, I can leave that Excel report open, go to lunch, come back, click the Refresh All, and all that data would be there that happened while I was away at lunch. So it allows people outside of GP to get at data that is up to date and the most current information without even having to log into GP. And what we had before is you had the option of taking this Excel report, or sorry, taking this SmartList and exporting it to Excel, but at that point that data is static. So if I wanted to get the new report, again, I'd have to call somebody and say, hey, can you export that to Excel and send it to me again? And I'd have to keep doing that over and over again. But with the new functionality of the Publish, we have that data connection already there that allows that data to automatically be updating as we go along in the system. All right, so at that point, I am done doing my demos here, so let me get back to my PowerPoint. So that's a little bit about the publishing reports and the demo. So at this point, I want to go ahead and open it up to some questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and enter your comments or questions into the Q&A section.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. And we do have quite a few that have come in already. Do you want to take those, or do you want me to?
Sure. Yep. I'm just reading through the first one here. Okay, so the one question I have here, it says, not necessarily a SmartList question, but will Microsoft Dynamics GP ever have the capability of viewing 2 or more reports at once? And I'm not sure if you are talking about within SmartList. where you can have two different reports open at the same time, or if you're just talking about reports in general. But because SmartList is contained all within one window, you can only have that one window open one time. The other option you would have would be if you had two different users, you could log into GP twice and have those two windows sitting side by side and then be able to view the two reports at the same time that way. Oh, okay, here's a good question. What SQL permissions will users need to be able to access the tables and the dropdown? So for the tables, all that information, the table security, let me just go back in here into the SmartList Designer window. What I see for my table structure here is going to be based off of the user that I am assigned to inside of GP. So we use our GP security to determine what table structure. So if I'm set up as a payroll clerk, only the tables that a payroll clerk has access to would that user be able to see within GP. Now the views are a little bit different where we go and look at the views based off of the security that you have set up for that particular user. So within the SQL Management Studio, you would need to set that particular security up based off of the user. So you'd have to create their user ID and then assign it security that way. One thing I do also want to point out is not only from a table and not only from a table standpoint, but also from a SmartList query standpoint, what we would need to do is if I go under my security, I would want to create a task for all of my different security, or I'm sorry, for all my SmartLists that I'm creating. So what I've done ahead of time, and let me just pull it up here. I'm going to want to create a task for the different SmartLists that I'm creating. So if I'm going to create 50 different SmartLists, and some of them are going to be sales reports, and some are going to be payroll reports, and let's say because we did some inventory reports, some are going to be inventory. I need to go ahead and set up different tasks and then assign those tasks to the proper users. So let's just go through this example here real quick. Within my security task, I'm going to create my new task ID, and I'm going to choose my product of SmartList. My type is going to be SmartList Objects. My series is also going to be SmartList Objects. And then you'll see a list of all of the different SmartLists that are created. So you'll also see the ones out here that I created. Like here's my items with price. I've got my people one, that's one I created earlier. I've got my time cards, payroll, one out there. So what I would want to do is mark the security for those ones that I'm going to want to give access to in a particular task. So now that I've created this, I'm going to go ahead and click Save. So I've got that task created. And now if I go in under my security, and then my roles, any role that that is going to be assigned to a user that's going to want those tasks, I'm going to want to choose as well. So let's say in this particular example, my accounting manager, she wants access to all of those SmartLists that I just created. Now if I come through here and scroll down, and these are in alphabetical order, now I see my SmartList reports. So if I mark this option here and click Save, anybody that's in that role of accounting manager would now have access to those SmartLists that I created during my demo today. So you have two different things depending on their GP security and then also the individual SmartLists themselves. So it's security in SmartList is actually two pieces. It's one, giving them access to the SmartList, and then two, giving them access to the data. All right. The next question is, in the database view window, can you apply a filter and narrow down the list like you can in SQL Studio Management Studio? And the answer to that is no, you can't. What it does, though, is it will only give you a list back of what that person has access to. So because I was set up as a SQL administrator, I see every single view that's out there. In a normal case, an end user is only going to see the views that they have access to. So that should filter down that list a little bit. All right, so there's a question of, in the filter in the SmartList Designer, can I use this to compare data in 2 fields instead of 1 field and a value? And the answer to that one is no. Right now, it would just filter out based off of the data and a value. If you wanted to do something like that, you could actually create a SQL view that filters out that information and then create your SmartList off of that view. And that actually might even make your SmartList faster if you use a view instead of using multiple different tables. Let's see. Okay, so somebody is asking, I'm not sure if this is a question or a comment, but it says, I really like the SmartList Designer's ability to modify existing canned SmartList. However, if the client also has SmartList Builder, I think Builder is breaking SmartList if the Modify button is selected. Sometimes all I need is to use the Designer, not Builder. So just to give a brief overview as to what SmartList Builder is, and we get a lot of questions on this, is what's the difference between SmartList Designer and SmartList Builder? SmartList Designer is a product that Microsoft has created, whereas SmartList Builder is an OEM product that one of our resellers, our partners, has created from E1 Solutions. And SmartList Designer is newer. SmartList Builder has been around for a few more years, and with a third-party product, they actually do have the ability to take a button and then change it to have their window launch open. And in this case, if that's what's happening, what you can do is that you can just turn off SmartList Builder, and then when you click that Modify button, then Designer would open back up. Or you can also just navigate to the actual SmartList Designer window as well within the Administration tab, and then the SmartList Designer action within that Reports panel on the Administration page. Somebody asked if this is included in the perpetual licensing or if it's a separate product license. And this is included with the perpetual licensing. So as long as you've purchased GP, you will automatically get SmartList Designer for free. That's part of the core functionality within the System Manager. Yeah, somebody else made a comment about Designer and Builder. So if you turn, like I said, if you turn off Builder, then you should be able to go in and click on the Modify button, and that should launch your SmartList Designer. The question is, can you change the name of the columns? Not right within the SmartList Designer tool, you cannot, but what you can do is if you want the columns to be named something different, I would recommend doing that within a SQL view and then using that view to create your SmartList, and then that information would come back with those column headings the way that you would want them. Okay, so the next question was, if you double click on the newly created suggested items list, will it open up the inventory item card? And the answer to that one is no. And the reason for that is because I did not create any go-tos. Current functionality doesn't allow you, if you create a brand new list, it doesn't allow you to create a go-to to jump to an inventory window or to any other windows. But what you could do in that particular case is if you create your suggested item list based off of the item list, then it would allow you to open up that window because it would bring those go-tos across for you. But by default, you can't create those open item or open form go-tos. All right. Oh, here's another question. Can you access tables in the database outside of the GP company database? Right now, we don't have that functionality, but if you can get, if you create a view that would actually go to a different database and grab the data and create that view within your GP company database, you should be able to get the view that way. So, or get to the data that way. Right now, we only can show what's in the actual company database within the SmartList Designer, but creating a view within your database to grab the data out of a different database is an option for that particular suggestion. The question is, can formulas be added to a list? For example, list price times item quantity. Definitely you can do that. Let me go back and just share my screen real quick. If I go in, oops. If I go into one of my lists and modify that, as long as those fields are available within the list, I can create a calculated field that would grab that information. So I could go price times quantity is what I could call it, and have that one be currency. And then if I had those two particular fields, like I don't have those within this one, but I would just take list price and then do my function of arithmetic and do multiply. And then if I had a quantity field, let's just say, for example, this one. Oops. I could save that one, and it tells me that that calculated field is valid. And then that would automatically, oh, let me go back in here. Then that field would show up in my suggested fields list. And then that calculation would happen when you go through and render your report. The question is it possible to use the physical names from tables and fields? Whatever shows within the SmartList Designer tool is what you would see. So we are, not in all cases, but in most of the cases, we are pulling back the physical names of the fields. For sure within the Microsoft Dynamics GP dictionary we are, but if there's any third parties, it's how they determine that their physical names are set up within their tables. Okay, so the question is, do the new Excel reports appear in the Excel navigation list? Yes, they do, and they would show up based off of the series that was created when you created the SmartList Excel itself. So in my case, the one that I did for the accounts was under the financial, so that report would show up under my financial Excel navigation list. Okay, so the next question was, is the ability to publish only available if the data is selected from a SQL view? And that is correct. It's something that we are working on right now to allow to be able to publish if a report is based off of tables. But currently within GP 2015, it's only for SQL view data, data designer SmartList. Okay, so the question was, how do you publish and where do people go to get those reports? So once you publish, those reports are out where you deploy the Excel reports. So if you go in under your tools setup, system and reporting tool setup, where those Excel reports are deployed to, that's where they would show. But you do also have the ability to see those reports with inside a GP. If you go through the navigation list and find the Excel reports, they will also show up there as well. Somebody asked a question about the differences between Designer and SmartList Builder. There is different functionality between the two, and I guess in that case I would actually just point you out to E1, to their webpage. They will go through and they've got like a little graph that shows the differences between the two. One of the biggest ones is being able to have running totals within your SmartList. That's something that we're looking at adding, but for right now that's not in there. SmartList Designer is really a tool that if I had a customer, or if I was a customer and was wondering, which one do I use, I would start off with SmartList Designer. One, because it's free, and two, you automatically get it, and just look and see if it's going to work for you. If it's missing functionality, then I would go and look at SmartList Builder and see if they have that functionality that you need, and then move to that product. And I would also say, like, if you already have SmartList Builder, you might not necessarily want to go back to Designer. I would just look at that comparison tool and just see, if there's certain things that E1 has that ours doesn't, then you probably would want to stay with Builder. But if you're a brand new customer, I would always start off with Designer first, and then find if it's missing things, then go look at the SmartList Builder tool. The question is, how do you relate tables if they don't have a common field? In that case, you probably aren't going to create a SmartList that has data that doesn't have anything in common. There has to be something in common between the two in order to link them. Otherwise, you're probably going to have two different lists. But if you have a specific example and you want to email that to me, feel free to do that. My email address is Jen Olson, JenOlson @Microsoft.com. So somebody has a question about whether this demo will be available on the website, and I guess I might have to have Jason answer that. I know that he's recording this, but I'm not sure if it's available after the fact.
Yeah, that's right. So we're recording it now. It'll take probably a couple days to get it up on the site, but we'll post it to our YouTube channel and right on msdynamicsworld.com, and then we'll send an alert to everyone who registered for today's event.
All right, perfect. Okay, so the next question is, can you point SmartList at a replicated database rather than a live database? No, you can't, because what it does is it's looking at the data within the SQL tables of the database that you're logged into. If you wanted to, you could always, if you have GP set up to log into that replicated database, then you could always log in and look at the same SmartList within that database. Your other option is to create a view and then have that SmartList use that view that's pointing at the replicated database rather than the live database. Okay, so the next question is, can you create a go-to to go to a window? And currently, no, we do not have that functionality. That is something that we are looking at adding, though, because right now you can add, go to another SmartList, you can have it go to a navigation list, and you can have it go to a web page, but we don't have the option to go to a form as of right now, unless you create your list based off an existing list that already has go-tos on it, kind of like I did with that item one. The question is, does this support joining to data on a linked server? That is not supported as of right now. That is also something that we're looking at working on, because there really shouldn't be any reason why it doesn't do it, but I do know for a fact that it does not do that right now. So that is something that we're looking at. If you want to also put a suggestion out on our MS Connect site, that would be great. All right, let's see here. Oh, somebody asked the question is, how do you change the properties of a drop-down field? Currently, they show a number instead of text. I'm not sure if I understand that question. I don't know if that's once it's out in Excel or if that's within the SmartList designer, but if you want to send that question, if you want to send more information to me, you can feel free to email me. Yes, so the last, well, not the last question, but one of the last questions is going over publishing again from my SmartList to SharePoint, and then going in a little more detail in the setup. So if I come out to, let me just share my screen here real quick. If I come out to my reporting tool setup, under Excel reports, you would just choose your SharePoint location, or the location would be SharePoint, and then you'd put in your SharePoint site, your data connection library, and then your report library. And I don't have a SharePoint site set up in order to put data in here. But if you put those 3 fields and populate those, and then go through the deployment process, it will deploy those reports out there that are the default Excel reports within GP. It'll push those out there. And then when you are in SmartList, if your list was created off of a SQL view, this won't have that one either. This inactive, then this publish button would be available. And when you hit publish, that inactive accounts list would publish out to that same SharePoint location. So it's all driven off of your reporting tool setup for your Excel reports. And there's documentation on exactly what you need to have in there too. If you go through your reporting tool setup and come in here, and if you go to help, it'll walk through exactly what you need to have within those 3 different fields once you have your SharePoint site set up. All right. Okay, so the next question is, how do you know which table to pick first when building a relationship, and does it matter? If you're going to be always using inner joins, then it doesn't matter because you're always going to be looking where the data is in both of the tables. So an inner join, whether you have one table on the left and one table on the right, wouldn't matter. If you're going to use a left join, then it does matter because you're going to want to pick the table that has most of the information in it versus what's in the second table. Like in my example, when I did customer master and then I linked it to the RM open, if I did an inner join, it really wouldn't matter which of those 2 is first. If I did a left and I had customer master first, then what it would do is it would give me a list of all the customers, even if they didn't have a transaction. But if I had the RM open table left and then the customer master on the right or second, then it's only going to, it's going to pull all the RM open transactions, and then it wouldn't pull any customers because it's only going to pull what's in the open table first. So that's the difference between those 2. And if you even go out on either to like MSDN or even go out and do a Bing search on table relationships, it'll give you really good examples of the difference between inner joins and left joins and cross joins. So if you have specific questions on that, you can definitely do that. Somebody asked if SmartList Designer is available in GP 2013. It was not available in GP 2013, but it was available in GP 2013 Service Pack 2. That was the first time we added functionality. And since then, we've been adding new functionality. So we added new features within Service Pack 2, R2, and then 2015. And then there's new functionality coming out here in GP 2015 R2 as well. There's a question on, is there a way in SmartList Designer to add a formula in Excel to total a column? And that currently does not work with, or we don't have that functionality currently in SmartList Designer. What you'd have to do is go out into Excel. Once you've got the report pushed out to Excel and create those columns and those formulas yourself within Excel. But that is functionality, again, that we are looking at going forward. The next question is, can you publish a smart list that will allow a user to change a filter? You can't really change the filters outside of the way the filter is set up within SmartList because now you're outside and you're in Excel, but you should be able to use the Excel functionality to filter different columns within that Excel spreadsheet. The next question is, can you access data from a non-GP database? The way you could do that is if you created a view within your GP database to link out to that other non-GP database and pull the data back in. So I could create a view that said, select, create view as, and then select the information from that other particular database, and then have that view stored within the GP database, and then I could get that information. Somebody is asking a question about the total amounts of deposits in a report by payment type. I'm guessing they want to see if the report allows them to create summaries and totals, and the answer for that right now is currently no, but it is something that we're looking at adding in the future. Yes, you have to add the totals afterwards each time. So if you're exporting it out to Excel, and you're putting the totals in there, then yes, you'd have to redo that when you go through and reconnect your data. A question on how do you change the format of some of the fields, such as a number that has extra zeros. Currently within SmartList Designer, or even SmartList, we don't have the ability to change the formatting of some of the fields unless it's a currency field. And then in that case, you can double click on it, but that just lets you change the ending zeros. If you wanted to change the field within Excel, you'd have to use the Excel functionality to change the format there. There isn't really anything within the SmartList or SmartList Designer tool that would allow you to do that. Okay, somebody asked about where non-GP users go to see the Excel reports that have been published. That's within my setup within the reporting tool setup window. You either choose the Sharepoint location or you choose the network share, and so that's where those reports would be published. There's a question about where's the most current SmartList Designer manual. It should be in the Report Writer manual. And it also should be online either under Customer Source or Partner Source. If you go to the Reporting Tools manual, that information should be in there. Somebody asked a question of, can you import SmartList Builder objects into SmartList Designer? And the answer for that one is no, you can't, because they're two different products. So there's no way to import SmartList Builder information into Designer. Somebody asked for my email address, and it's Jen Olson, JenOlson, @Microsoft.com. All right, let's see here. All right, so somebody asked a question again about publishing to Excel, so let me just go out there here within GP. Oops. All right, so once I'm inside of Microsoft Dynamics GP, if I go to the Administration tab, and then I go under Setup, then System, and then there's this Reporting Tool Setup, then there's an Excel tab, this is where those Excel reports would get deployed to, or if you are going to publish reports outside of SmartList, this is where they go. So anybody who has access to this location outside of GP, that's where they're going to want to see those reports at. Inside of GP, if you go through any of the navigation, there's this Excel option or this Excel reports under each particular series. Those reports would show up there as well. So if I go under financial and I go under Excel reports, this might take a second for it to load up. But if I scroll through here, here's my inactive ones that I created right here. So that was that one that I created earlier. And if I double click on it, it should render that report for me. So those reports that I deploy, even using SmartList, will show up within the Excel reports. All right, I think I made it through the question. So if you have other questions, feel free to always follow up with me as well. So I appreciate your guys' time, and sorry I went a little bit over, but there's a lot of questions out there. So
Thanks for all the questions, everybody. And as we do wrap up here, please do look for the survey as we leave. We really appreciate the feedback. Our speakers do as well. It should only take 15 or 20 seconds to fill out. Well, Jennifer, thanks so much for taking the time today to present and to answer so many questions. Some great feedback from the audience too. So thanks everyone there too.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you
All right,
again.
with that, we'll conclude today's session. Have a great day.